To today's Global Justice Report. I'm your host for today. I'm Betsy Bowman. I'd like to welcome you to a very special event today on the anniversary of 9/11. Of course, we wanted to do something appropriate. It's the 22nd anniversary of the US 9/11, but it's also the 50th anniversary of the other 9/11, when Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon successfully overthrew the Allende government in Chile. Ariel Dorfman was on Amy Goodman this morning. It's worth a watch. We know that 2001, 9/11, 2001 marks the beginning of the war on terror. It was that day when my husband and I decided that maybe it was time to leave the United States. We'd all decided we'd leave if Nixon got elected president in 1968, but I was only 13 then, so I didn't leave the country. But we did in 2003, along with a number of other friends from New York City who came with us. We didn't really know each other before, but Gregory Diamant, our speaker for today, and his wife Irene moved down at the same time as my husband, Bob Stone, and myself. Also Arturo Yarish, who's been involved in the center all these years. And the year before, Cliff Duran and his wife Julie Duran moved here, and it was a conspiracy. We conspired together to organize the Center for Global Justice in San Miguel Allende, Guanajuato, Mexico. So here we are, 20 years later, and we're still going. I don't know if we're going strong, but we're going. And I'm sure you all know that. The Center for Global Justice, or El Centro para la Justicia Global, ACE, is a multinational bilingual organization in San Miguel in the central Mexico, dedicated to research and learning for a better world, and dedicated to empowering the social and solidarity economy. That is our main focus. We have provided free workshops on what is a cooperative for groups of women, groups of people from neighboring communities, old small indigenous communities, of which there are 540 right around San Miguel. So we've got our work cut out for us. And after 20 years, we've actually had some success. So I'm very happy to announce that we survived the pandemic, and we've managed with Via Organica to start a market of organic food to promote nutritional food and in the area, and to help local farmers organize themselves in cooperatives. But and I also want to mention that the center is funded entirely by participation in our events, our Monday webinars, our educational trips to Chiapas, to Cuba. We're famous or infamous for our trips to Cuba, or Cliff is. Go to our webpage, globaljusticecenter.org, if you're interested in signing up for any of those. And then we also support ourselves through donations. So we do appreciate very much any donations you can send us. Just go to our webpage and click on the donate button. So today is the beginning, the 22nd anniversary, the beginning of the war on terror. It's also there have been at least two illegal wars that the US has waged since then. The Department of Homeland Security, of course, was started in the wake of that, of the 9/11 crime. The Department of Homeland security has cost the US government over $1 trillion since 2001. $1 trillion just for all those wonderful people at the airport, you know, and all the cameras around everywhere you go. The US government has spent about $2 trillion on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's, oh, and of course, another $1 trillion on interest on the debt, another $500 billion on care for the veterans. And it's also cost 4.5 million people their lives. 4.5 million people have been killed because of this war on terror, directly or indirectly, in over 85 countries. The US, of course, has military bases in over 150 countries, 800 or so military bases. They themselves don't even know how many. It's also what spurred the passage of the Patriot Act, which has reduced all of our civil liberties quite a bit. 70 years since, so this year marks the 70 years since the overthrow of the US overthrow of Iran's leader, Mossadegh, 69 years since the US overthrew the government in Guatemala. I won't go on with the overthrows, but there have been a lot of successful revolutions in much of colonized Africa. They're having yet another wave of independence revolutions. Now, it's been 65 years since the successful revolution in Algeria, 64 or so years since the successful revolution in Cuba. So there have been a few positive moments. Now, Gregory is going to talk today about the anxiety apocalypse. Gregory has been a lifelong activist in the anti-war movement, the anti-racism movement. He has worked supporting unhoused women, and he's always been very dedicated to animals and animal rescue. He pursued studies at Boston University in social and intellectual history.
Well, thank you, Betsy, and good afternoon to everyone who's here and who's listening. Near the end of Franz Kafka's novel, The Trial, a prison chaplain calls out to the protagonist, Joseph K. You don't need to accept everything as true. You only have to accept it as necessary. How depressing, responds K. It makes world order dependent on this lie. Of course, world order throughout history has always depended on lies. Those lies our rulers tell us in order for us to obey, those we internalize that keep us from questioning too much, and those we tell each other that can give us a somewhat perverse satisfaction while creating a sense of community. The pervasiveness of the internet and social media have facilitated the spread of useful information, lies, and conspiracy theories that can proliferate at a rate that it would have been difficult for Kafka to fathom. We find ourselves dancing around a bonfire of inanities that generates much heat but little light. Perhaps we use the term Kafkaesque too liberally, but our regular encounters with opaque bureaucracies and the constant injunctions we take in as to succeed, whatever that means, and to be happy, a word probably as difficult to define as love. Here we need a poet. And we must consume, a form of satisfaction and addiction that leaves us content as we graze for what we can purchase with a click. Most of us gain little fulfillment from our work. No wonder many of us are confused and angry. We often turn to drink and drugs that stupefy us and help us to deal with our pain and emptiness. But I can't seem to let go of Kafka. Alienation, confusion, and discontent are so much a part of his universe, and so too of ours, that we need to delve a bit into our modern day swamp, into our collective and societal neuroses, and try to look for a way out to dry land where we hope to regain our footing. And even if we do find an alternative path, some leeches are going to come along for the ride. And that is okay, as long as we acknowledge their presence as we create our future. Remember that at the entrance to hell in Dante's Inferno, there is a sign that reads, Lasciate ogni speranza, voi che entrare. Abandon all hope, you who enter here. Well, Dante did not abandon hope, although it was often severely battered, and neither should we, although optimism and pessimism need to be left on the side of the road. Both of those are sterile forms of thinking that put our critical faculties to an unwarranted rest. The pervasiveness of fear, coupled with much insecurity in our work and personal lives, leads us to the monsters that can haunt our waking, sleep, and stupefied lives. We are under constant pressure to produce at work and in our so-called free time. What? At our work, there's no such thing as democracy or economic democracy. We punch in, we are told what to do and where to do it. We don't own the tools we are using, and I'm not just speaking of factory work, but service work as well. And all too often, there's a big eye watching us to ensure that we are continually productive. Frequently, we are asked to fill out forms with our opinions on the work we are doing. It is promoted as a way to make us feel part of a team and identify with what is often meaningless work. It is mostly eyewash, a way for us to internalize the injunctions I mentioned earlier. It is a form of self-exploitation that can create a false sense of intimacy and identification between those who control the levers of power and the rest of us. And for many of those working in the service industry, the customers are asked to rate us. Were we friendly? Did we solve their problem? Were we efficient? On a scale of 1 to 5, please rate your experience. Even students today are defined as customers and rate their teachers, professors in the same way. So too, the parents of minors in the educational system are given a false sense of control under a dubious rubric of liberty that is all too often a cover for censorship. Much of our lives are reduced to statistical form, being the meaningless collection of data. Do we fall within the norm? Are we part of the anomalies? What happens to those who fall outside the boundaries? Heavens, we don't want to be identified as losers and perhaps lose our jobs. Time and again, due to fear and the propaganda we have been absorbing during our lifetime, we fall prey to a deadening conformity. The creativity that lies within us that we can regularly observe with children at play has been sucked out of us. Life should not be about conforming. We need to embrace the organized complexity of disorder, the hurly-burly of life. We experience this organized complexity of disorder as we walk on a street. There's traffic, pedestrians, the sounds of life that surround us. We should embrace this little bit of anarchy in our lives and be curious. It can be a refreshing break from the commands that our external and internal lives are continually giving us. Imagine if we could collectively decide what and how to produce. If democracy was a part of our daily lives and not just a false spectacle that we are a part of periodically, only later to feel the familiar pangs of disappointment. Of course, we have to engage in difficult work, and yes, there is a need for leaders, but who chooses them? When we are not a true part of the process of deciding how and what we produce, when we don't own individually or collectively the tools we are living in a state of alienation. Simply put, alienation refers to something outside of us, outside of our control, that yet seems an integral part of our lives. There are blind economic forces over which we seem to have no control that lead to frustration and despair. Quasi-religious fetishes are created to help us live and perform. As an example, terms like the market are used in vulgar formulations such as the market decided, and thus more austerity is needed. But truly shine a light on the term, and it disintegrates like Dracula stepping out of his tomb at the wrong time due to a faulty watch. What is this thing that decides and then we suffer? Isn't it an abstract concept that has no corporeality, yet to which we assign earth-shaking powers? Something alienated from our being, seemingly beyond our control, and ironically and tragically, something we created, a god that lives on Mount Olympus and plays with us mere mortals. So many of us suffer from loneliness. We are alienated from each other. We desperately seek and need connection. Social media offers us both positive and negative connections. But even the positive connections, such as meeting on Zoom or other video connectors, suffer from a false sense of intimacy. Too many of our experiences are mediated by a digital device. All too often, we live in an electronic bubble. We find ourselves walking on the street or a country lane, but we can't hear the sounds of the city or the countryside. We are alienated from nature too. Where does our food come from? How do we get the raw materials that we use to make stuff? What happens to waste? How do we connect to each other and to the natural world of which we are a part? We seem to suffer from a toxic individualism. We are reduced to a monad floating in space. Community is mostly defined by consumerism. Connections are frequently made through identification with celebrity culture, another form of consumerism. On social media, via an outgrowth of video games, we create avatars, a digital continuation and modification of what we humans have been doing for millennia, via dress and jewelry, a practice that perhaps had been inspired by our observation of peacocks and other animals. But the whiff of anxiety and loneliness seems to pervade much of our current practice. On another note, we drag the chain of conspiracy theory behind us as we trudge along. Of course, it makes perfect sense. We can't make sense of the world. We know we have been continually lied to by our rulers and by our bosses, among others. We have been ill-educated, and the coin of trust has been severely debased. How can we discern the real from the false? And many of us question the concepts of truth and fiction. Alas, critical thinking is difficult and time-consuming, and not the type of consumption to which we are drawn. We live in the time of the big lie, and the command to enjoy permeates our air, along with other noxious pollutants. Kafka had it right. You don't have to accept what is true, just what is necessary. In the US and other Western nations, we pride ourselves in the philosophical liberty that we enjoy. But doesn't it cohabitate with gross inequality, accompanied by dissatisfaction, alienation, suspicion, and attendant conspiracy theories? But again, isn't this liberty a part of the big lie? A minority of us participate in elections to choose our rulers who are supposed to represent our interests. Don't so many of those running for office exhibit a pathetic insecurity? We live, excuse me, The interests that they represent are those of with the money and power that they have accumulated via exploitation on multiple levels. Ethical and financial consumption is the yeast that leavens the bread of our so-called liberty. We live in a society of spectacles, and I don't mean the ones that perch on the end of your nose. Our elections are like the carnivals in which the common people could dress up and ape and sometimes insult their betters. But remember that carnival is followed by Lent, and repentance follows in its train. Our so-called philosophical liberty is embedded in a gangster state in which punitive measures and shame color its existence. Our society seems to oscillate between two poles. On one side, there is a braying triumphalism characterized by nationalism and toxic individualism, often accompanied by racism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, and other unhealthy bacteria. On the other side lies dystopianism, not only embraced by many of us, but also by billionaires. Elon Musk, anyone? Looking for another planet or a missile silo to escape to when the apocalypse and its horsemen, climate change, famine, mass migration, etc., arrive. No wonder we suffer from societal and individual anxiety. It consumes our souls. We frequently succumb to a form of apocalyptic mysticism as we search for answers. We shall microdose our minds and spend our way to better health and gain the satisfaction of the acquisition of more stuff and be prepared for what? So much of what I have described are artifacts of the capitalist system in which we are embedded. Exploitation, destruction of so much of the natural world, toxic individualism, anxiety, loneliness, fear, societal neuroses, and the spread of the socially illiterate are right. Certainly, this is a heady stew. This leads us to the existential question: what is to be done? Clearly, things cannot go on as they are. One can read in many compelling writings that capitalism, with its primeval drive to accumulate profit at any cost, must be transcended. Its reckless destruction of our environment, cannot be overcome by technological fixes alone. At best, they can buy some time in limited ways. Many plants and animals are trying to adjust to the environmental crises via geographical movements, but extinction is on the menu, as is evolution, though constrained by time and geography. There is no doubt that we are going to see more famine, more migration, and the development and spread of more disease. We must recognize that we humans are in control. That is why we are controlling this age, the Anthropocene. Societal change is what needed, not just for human health, but for the health of our own Earth. Some believe that capitalism will collapse of its own accord and lead where? But the ultimate limits of capitalism may lie not only in the natural world, but subjectively within us. It is up to us humans to change the way we produce and jettison the concept of economic growth, that is, unbridled accumulation, as the touchstone of our lived and economic existence. We shall have to change the way we relate to each other and to the natural world, both the animate and inanimate parts that make up our planet. There is no cookbook, nor collection of recipes that we can follow to create a different world, a different way of relating. I only know that we and our descendants are the chefs who will have to be very creative and struggle to make the new. As I said earlier, some leeches will come along for the ride. We will have to know our history, and through trial and error, much error. We are not gods. And anyway, didn't they make a mess of things too? Start to craft a healthier physical and social world. Courage and humility are needed. Make a new world. Make love, make friends, and make jokes. Cosmic laughter is the background noise of the universe. Thank you.
Mayor, do you want to conduct the discussion? Because you can see the people
No, I
there.
can't. Yeah, I actually could.
Oh, okay. So comments, additions,
Criticisms.
criticisms. So very poetic presentation, I would say. And you know, who would have ever thought that getting old we'd come to this? You know, we were always told that things would get better and they never did. But there are positive things happening in the world, and it's easy to wallow in the alienation and just the grief of the world we live in.
Well, what I said is, yes, there is, but we need to have hope. And hope is what we need. And when times are toughest, that's when you need hope. That's when hope comes to the fore. Not optimism or pessimism, as I said, that's just sterility. But we have to buckle up. And as I said, we need courage and we need hope and find ways to work and struggle is part of hope. So I don't know if anyone else, if anyone has anything they want to.
I like to say, my alienation is with society who has chosen to be inward and narcissistic. On top, individualism comes from being with your nose in your book all day. You have noticed that there's a smell in the flowers and we have forgotten to be human. And you said it very clearly, we go to alcohol and drugs to kind of mitigate the loneliness that we put ourselves through by not reaching out to others. But when you go out to the real world, you will be full of optimism, not talking about an alienation and the anger and the loneliness, because the world out there is beautiful and it has not changed. I just received my first great-grandchild. I'm full of hope for him. And I know the world that is coming is going to be okay. But we have this mentality of the end. This is the end of the world. This is the nuclear war. This is let's put together something and construct a better world rather than speaking of it. Because that speaking of it is not going to do anything as you speak, and it's not going to be a change. The change begins with us rather than doing, being.
Well, I think, we agree on all of that, although I'm not an optimist or a pessimist, but I have hope. And as I said, we go out and we don't really see the world around us. We live in a bubble. We have things in our ears and we're listening and we don't see the people around us. We don't see nature around us. All of those things, we miss our beauty. And as I said, just watch children at play. I talked about that. And you see the creativity, and we need that creativity. And we need to embrace that creative disorder that is life. And those things are very important. And that's what we need to take within us and force out some of the things we've been told, the propaganda, the things that we've internalized that make us be able to function in a sick society. And you need people to be ill to function in a society that is itself perverse and sick. So we need to fight against that. We need to struggle, and not only in our relationships with people around us, but with organizing different ways of working and of being and having a democracy that exists within our relationships and at our work and so forth. And those are very important. That's what I was part of what I was trying to express. So I think that's really, really important. But as you said, we live, as I said, we live between these two poles. There's triumphalism, we've got nationalism, we are the best, we are the greatest, toxic individuals, I am the best, I succeed, you're no good. And then dystopianism on the other hand, oh, it's all going to go to hell, it's going to blow up and all of that. And it may, but that's our job, is to recognize those things and recognize things within us.
Irene wanted to say something.
Well, I don't get anything when someone says we have to have hope. To me, that's like saying we have to have faith. And I have no use for either unless there's action involved, unless there's something changing, unless you're working towards something. Otherwise, it just seems like a passive way of not getting involved with trying to make the changes that are destroying us.
I
So
agree.
I have an aversion. Do we have to have hope? We have to have faith.
No, I said you first need hope to recognize and critically think about what things are going on, and then you have to struggle. That's what I talk about. You have to create and you have to do things that are different and act in a different way. Examine within yourself and within the way society works. So hope for me is a way to critically think about what is going on, but you can't just think, you have to do. You have to, that's why I said at the end, you have to struggle. There'll be much struggle and there'll be much trial and error, a lot of error, as we and our descendants find our way to making a different and a better world. I don't know if there's anything here.
Well, you mentioned the horsemen of the apocalypse, and you threw in there climate change. That's a new one. That's one that we invented.
I said yes.
And then, of course, the threat of nuclear war is another horse of the apocalypse that humans have invented. And so now there aren't just 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, but at least 6, maybe more.
Many.
Yeah.
Well, war has
Regrettably.
always been one of the horsemen of the apocalypse. So
Oh, yeah.
whether it's nuclear or however, that's
Now,
one of them. But climate change certainly is one that is definitely a new one that people have come to realize in the last 30 years or so. But not all people, and many people don't realize or just say, as I said, there's technological fixes that we can deal with, and that's part of the triumphalism, because it doesn't deal with the social relations and the way society works. So, that's things we have to look at for what they are, that there's a lot of eyewash and greenwashing
yes, certainly a lot of
out-
greenwashing.
out there, and we have to call it for what it is.
I think you've described very well what Sartre would call the objective neurosis of our historical period, and which he dates it back to the middle of the 19th century, when French government killed striking workers in the streets of cities in France. And there's a whole new category of literature out there now on depression as a public health issue. And if you talk to anyone who's a therapist or a psychiatrist, they'll tell you, oh, yes, the amount of depression has risen by 40% since the pandemic. And, you know, they have statistics for everything, of course. But the feeling of something's not right is everywhere. And we feel it and we sense it in every moment of our lives and as we go about our days. And we're just not sure what to do about it. So I thought you were going to have some solutions, Gregory.
No, as I said at the end, I'm not a chef, you know, I
You're not a
can't
chef.
create the, you know, the recipes for the future. This is something that has to come by all of us and our descendants as they struggle, and they will have to create the new. We just know that something new has to be created and what the problems are. And we have to create different ways of relating, but that's going to happen, as Irene said, through action and struggle. And we can't dictate how our grandchildren are going to deal with all these problems. They have to take up the reins and do the things and find out how to do it in their struggle. And as I said, there'll be a lot of trial and error. All I know is we have to recognize these things and fight for the new. Just define what the new is, and then you'll redefine what the new is.
James Palumbo has something to add. Maybe he has a solution for us. James? Hi, James, you want to talk?
I'm here. I'm just unmuted myself. So
Great.
Good presentation. I've been connected with you guys in Cliff Duran for probably a decade or so in different ways.
Great.
And I'm the facilitator for the Campaign for Informed Citizenry, which started in San Miguel. And under a fellow named Russ Archibald. And you may remember Russ or not, I'm not sure. But as I look out what's happening in the country, and by the way, shortly after 9/11, I was a professor with the University of Maryland's Overseas Division. And shortly after 9/11, I was back in the States. And I contacted the director of the European program, who was also in charge of the Middle East. And I said, I want to go to the Middle East with the troops and, with the University of Maryland. And within 6 months, I was there. So my reaction to 9/11 was to sort of get as close to the fray as I could, which is sort of what I do anyway. And so there's some interesting experiences that I can attached to, and given what was happening post 9/11 and our involvement in the Middle East and our policies and how it played out on the battlefield. That being said, and if you get a chance to take a look at the Campaign for Informed Citizenry, and I just posted this little piece on the chat. Robert Merton had an interesting theory. Was connected to crime, deviant behavior, actually. But it said a lot more about the American landscape than Merton. He implied that a lot in his strain anomy theory about how people in the state of normlessness start to take on certain behaviors that they might not have otherwise taken on. And that's what I see happening in the US. It's more evident today than I've seen in the past. So it's worth visiting his theory. And it's worth noting that that there are theories that speak to this. And one of the areas that I find most concerning is that the American public really doesn't have a sense of its connection to capitalism in terms of our ideological character. We talk a lot about democracy, but very little about capitalism. And that's what's framed our ideological character, those two concepts. And so I advocate for bringing those in a civic education way, bringing those two elements together and saying, if we want to talk about the American experiment, we have to include both of these because there's social man and there's economic man. And I'm including women in that. So please understand that. But we need better civic education, not to say that capitalism is bad, but to understand what it is first, and then to make some judgments accordingly. And because we need an economic system, and the world has attached to capitalism, China, for different reasons and in different ways, but the world has attached to capitalism as the current economic system to move things forward. And there's different versions of capitalism, and most people don't even understand that. So I would encourage that the Center for Global Justice take a bit of this position, and we can talk more. I'm headed back down there in October, the end of October. And I would even like to see this brought forth maybe during the writers' conference and have some discussions that run across nonpartisan lines, whether you're liberal, conservative, or alternative thinkers. This idea of talking about America in its true ideological character is an important way to maybe reach some solutions to the kinds of problems that we face. So that's what I'm throwing on the table. And I appreciate the invitation to listen to what you guys had to say today. Mr. it's Diamante, I think,
Diamant.
Diamant, sincerely stated. So I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Let us know when you get to town. And we can certainly work together. We're not too involved with the writers' conference, but we have our weekly Monday events, and we can address some of these concerns.
I just so I can throw this in, I did a couple of I3 series presentations when I was down there last time. And I got in touch with Rob Lerner, who is a friend of mine, and I said, hey, I noticed that in the I3 series and in the writers' conference, there's no political conversations, none. And someone has to sort of step up and offer that, because given the state of affairs in the upcoming presidential elections, or circus, if you want to call it, we should be having this, whether it's liberal, conservative, or in between. I mean, there should be something going on in conjunction with the writers' conference. It might be an opportune time. And I know what the Center for Global Justice has stood for. So anyway, okay, I'll put my campaign note in their website, and then we'll pick it up when we pick it up.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
But I do think that capitalism is a lot of the problem, and reproducing the world of capital. This is what Bob Stone wanted to say today. Reproducing the relations that underlie capitalism and underlie capital, they're not the same thing, is I think what one of the main causes of the anomie that people are feeling. Mark, you have your hand up. What would you like to add?
I'd be glad to raise my question, but Bob actually has had his hand up for a while. Maybe he should go first.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Go right ahead, James.
Go ahead, Bob.
Yes.
Either one of you, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to relate experience this past weekend. I normally work on international issues, particularly Cuba and trying to change U.S. policy toward Cuba. But this weekend, I volunteered to go out with some people who are trying to get a ballot initiative in Santa Cruz, California, to limit the height of buildings because there's some discussion in the city council about dramatically increasing the available height. The topic isn't so much relevant as what I experienced. First of all, related to what Greg was saying, the experience of actually going door to door and talking with people was so much different than what I've been doing in most of my Cuba Solidarity work, or what I'm doing right now of looking at boxes and talking to people, which I think is important, and I don't dismiss that, particularly for those of us who are trying to change the world. But the other thing that struck me is in talking with so many people, many of whom agreed to sign the petition to get this issue on the ballot. When I raised the question about building heights, they said, yeah, the city council seems to be beholden to the developers and to the business owners. Santa Cruz, California is a little bit different, perhaps, it is different than some other communities around the US. But what struck me is their analysis was right on in terms of the way in which capital, or at least the private owners are shaping what goes on in the city. But what also struck me is how they were glad somebody had come around to get their signatures, but for the most part, not involved at all, and feeling helpless or alienated, maybe that's the word, about something they, it didn't take more than 2 words to provoke, a really emotional response to the issue, and not just emotional, analytical. And I don't know, it's got me thinking about how we need to be working, I mean, I've worked in workplaces where people don't have political discussions, and certainly in communities where they don't. But starting somewhere and getting moving on it seems, I don't know. I'm at least inspired by some of my neighbors who I didn't know before this past weekend, but at the same time know that we've got a huge set of challenges that we need to begin to address. And as Greg mentioned, first coming up with a clear image of potential alternatives, and then struggling to refine and shape those and hopefully achieve them. So let me leave it at that.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, it is amazing how, just something like building height can spark an entire criticism and analysis of what we see happening around us. But that's the struggle. The struggle is to get up off your duff, go outside and talk to people. That's step 1 in the struggle.
And also, it was very good what you said, that the cliche, everything is connected. Yes, but it's very important to see that, but how are they connected, and what are the relations, and the social and economic, all of them, in my mind, cannot be divided or as if they're 2 separate things. They're all connected, and that's the kind of critical thinking we need to do. And things come out as people get in these struggles like you're doing with the city council in Santa Cruz. Just talking about building heights can lead to a whole lot of other issues that are going on. So you open a little door and it gets to another door and another door, and all of a sudden people start to see things that they hadn't thought about before. So it's very important, and thank you.
Bob?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I wanted to thank James for putting in the vote as a source of power of individuals. And we do need to use the vote as citizens to be able to change things. The vote is a creature of this, what Sartre calls the seriality of modern life, which is the resemblance we have to numbers when we go out to buy something or when we go out to get a job. We compete on the basis of everyone is numerically equal. Capitalism's reproduction requires this kind of atomism of us, and that's what we spontaneously think of ourselves as being. And it's very sad and it's very lonely, but it is, as James has pointed out, a campaign for informed citizenry, and many others do the same. We have an election coming up, and I think the only, and unfortunately only, lonely voice that I can vote for is Cornel West, which I will do in order to open the dialogue for moving beyond capitalism, which I think Gregory has so brilliantly pointed to as the source of our impotence and our powerlessness to resist. Well, if for anything, the coming nuclear war that is being prepared in the Russian-Ukraine confrontation, I'm still hopeful that something like the amazing new slogan of the G20 conferred on it by Modi, the most unlikely possible origin of this slogan. The slogan is
One
one earth, one family, one
future.
future. It's a winning slogan, but you can't realize it under capitalism. But it's precisely the one that we need to have relations of brother and sister to each other. And only that can be secured if we all together pursue the meeting of each other's needs. We've been trying to get along without doing that for 400 years. Hasn't worked very well. Let's try to open the vision that Gregory is asking us to open.
Thank you, Bob. Would you like to respond?
Well,
Okay.
at the risk of being vulgar, which I have been known to be quite often, when I heard that slogan, it reminded me of the old, is it a Texas slogan? I don't know, of money talks and bullshit walks. And coming from the mouth and Modi, and who's a quasi-fascist, and of the the participants in the G20, which we know what they are, it kind of turned my stomach. And it made me think of some things that came out of Nazi Germany too, one family, or one, all this kind of thing. Of course, how do you define the family? Certainly, I, being a Jew, was not part of it. But so, we have to be careful with those things. And what does it really mean? I don't want to embrace it. I want to think about it. I want to critique it and hold a mirror up to it and say, okay, very lovely. What are you doing? And all of you who are in the heads of the G20, not just Modi, of course, but all of you, what is it that you do? And the other point, I vote and I will vote and I have voted. So yes, it is one thing to be doing, but part of why I brought up the term philosophical liberty and what it all the ugly things with which it cohabitates and how it puts a veil over things. Many of the words we use and the things we do conceal and don't allow us to penetrate to the truth of things, to the reality, and then say, what is truth? And we can go into a whole philosophical thing there. But I think that's part of what critical thinking is about. And so, yes, we have this philosophical liberty, which every couple of years we're allowed to vote in some sort of way. And I'm not just talking about the US. I mean, I care if it's France or Germany or, Iceland or wherever it is. But what does it really mean? And what is it part of? And within what is it embedded? And what kind of what I call the gangster state that we live in, is it part of? And so we have to see those things. And I think that what was mentioned before about this initiative in Santa Cruz with building heights can often be a way to start to peel away the veil and allow one to see some things that are philosophical liberty, if you will, conceal. Because as I said at the beginning of my talk, we're lied to all the time. And it's part of why I quoted Kafka at the very beginning. We just have to agree to what is necessary. It doesn't matter what the truth is and what is necessary just to keep things going as they are and not change. So anyway, I don't want to be overly repetitious. That's my take.
Liz wants to add something, please.
Okay.
And then James, he's got his hand up again.
I just want to comment on how I really appreciated your talk, Gregory. And one of the things that I hold on to is that we need to change our relation with each other and the rest of nature. And one of the sources of hope for me in my life is a movement that's very international and on the ground, and that's a movement for a new food system,
Right.
which has the potential to really help to address our relation to nature in a very basic way. It's sort of going back to basics. It's one of we have to change everything, but that's one of the things we have to change. And I wanted to particularly mention it because that's going to be the topic of our talks for the next 2 weeks. That next week we have our
Ercy, yeah. Yeah, I forgot to mention that next week, Ercelia Sohoris, who works with Via Organica and is a founding member of Regenerative Agriculture, will be speaking. And she lives here in San Miguel, so she'll be here in person. So I encourage you all to come back next Monday. And the following Monday is?
It'll be Mario Fernandez, who's working on the federal level on the issue of food sovereignty in Mexico.
Uh-huh.
And he's going to be talking about what's going on, how people on the ground are actually making change.
Well, that's extremely important. And we're all aware that if we change from the industrial agriculture that we have now, we might not have wars in the breadbasket of Eastern Europe industrial agriculture produces what percentage of carbon emissions? It's huge. It's just huge. Yeah, but it's on our webpage. Anyway.
Someone had their hand up.
Yeah, James, if you'd like to contribute.
Just didn't take his down.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know.
That's it.
there's certainly many, many things that everybody can do. Just do something. Do something. Get involved in some way. Do something, and maybe we'll get lucky and stave off the worst. James, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to like force a thought here, but it seems to me that if you had, it's important to encourage critical thinking, irrespective of where that leads. A critical thinking you may come out more in favor of capitalism than against it, or be a moderate. The idea is to put all the variables on the table, as many variables as possible, and see how people internalize those variables relative to their own existence. And I've done this in the classroom for decades. And I had a project in Cuba. I've gone to Cuba at least a half a dozen times, trying to bring Cuban students and US students to talk together about their sides of the coin relative to capitalism. And it was a great idea. And some of the people that I met in Cuba kept telling me, we're all for this. Revolutionaries, by the way. Manuel Yepes was one of my really inspiring type people who ran the revolution in Havana while Fidel was in the mountains. And he kept saying, I dig what you're saying. You're going to have more problems with your country than you are with ours, because we're for this. We want to see the communications happen. We want to sit down. And I wrote a screenplay or stage play based on one of my friend's books called The Tragedy of Fidel Castro. And it was produced at Binghamton University. And it brings up all these issues between Kennedy and Castro. And what are those issues? And let people hear the kinds of things that you're implying, but also what business people will say, that money does talk and bullshit walks. That's true for a lot of people. It was true for me when I began my career in thinking. And so put it all on the table. And I've done that in the classroom, and I've seen people who walked out with it being encouraged by the idea that I didn't realize what I was saying, or how what I was saying impacted others or even myself. And that's all we can ask for as educators or people that are trying to influence some change in thinking and in acting. And I think that's our initial step, and we've just stepped over that. You can't bring people to be critical of capitalism if they don't understand what it is. It won't happen. It'll just be, yeah or no, or CNN versus Fox. It'll be like, wow, this isn't what we're supposed to be doing as educators. So I'll encourage that again. I hope you all get a chance to take a look at Ideological Clarity at the Campaign for an Informed Citizenry, and I'll be down there, and you have my emails there at that site. My previous book, How I Got Into All This, is noted at that site. And I'll be happy to come, and we'll chat and have coffee and rock and roll, as they say, and we'll go from there. But again, thanks, guys.
That'll be great, James. I'm looking forward to that. Anybody else want to add something?
Well, I'll just say one thing, if I may. The only thing that's left out of the vision of single vote, secret ballot capitalism is human need. We can't meet needs with isolated serialized votes. What's missing is the human connection, what the French call fraternité. That's what's missing in the attempt to put all matters in yes or no votable terms. For that, you have to serialize people, and that means not feeling their needs. And, but I think if we do, we get a technicolor as opposed to black and white image of humanity. And that's where we can respond to each other as humans. And, you know, a union vote for strike is based on need. Those are the kinds of votes I go for. And I think we need to have those discussions that James is talking about, but always listening to each other's bodies, our own needs, our basic needs, and make sure that everyone in our polity has them met. And we just simply can't guarantee that under capitalism. And that was what was discovered, as Betsy was alluding to, in 1848 in the revolutions, when these humanitarian revolutions that seemed to imply the power of individuals realized that, wait a minute, only if you have property can you vote. And that was true in many places. We need to bring a lot of other people into the dialogue. And now that we have the internet, we can actually hope that all of humanity can enter into the dialogue James is talking about. And that's what I would like, to make sure that everyone not only has access to the internet, but can eat. And we don't have that world. Countless people are starving, and more are going to starve every day because of the inability of capitalism to meet needs.
Thank you, Bob. That's it is striking how just the last few days on the news, we only watch PBS, they're talking about people starving, not being, food insecure, but actual starvation. And years ago, I remember saying that someday we'll be asked, are we willing to continue our standard of living knowing that people are starving to death? Well, I think we've gotten to that day. And I don't know. So what would someone else like to put in a word, say something?
Tom?
Hi, you guys. I'm just scribbling notes as fast as I can. I don't even recall how the apocalyptic anxiety caught my attention. And, I'm just, as somebody, I kind of consider myself a cultural worker, and, and I tend to think a big part of the problem of what's going on in the world today, especially in the US, domestically, I think people are, deeply, deeply afraid, to the point that it's kind of silencing a lot of meaningful dialogue. And so, because you guys were addressing that, it seemed to me, and I think that is the case, I was drawn here. So I'm just really interested in what I'm hearing, taking notes, and grateful to be on this call with you all.
Yeah, I think people are feeling paralyzed, and paralyzed certainly with fear, and they're not sure how things are going to turn out, and nobody is. And it's hard to get out of being paralyzed, of course, and that's where the struggle comes in. First, it's a personal struggle with yourself to get out of the paralysis and to do something. But that's why we try to get up and put one foot in front of the other every day.
Well, health is, if I just could say, mental health in this case, and what you were just bringing up, and thank you for your comments, is not just a personal thing, or you have to get healthy yourself first. Within changing things, within struggle, one can get healthier also, and you form connections with people that are meaningful and not meaningless as so many of ours are. And we've created in too many ways a kind of zombie public, I guess. And you know, and therefore that stupefaction that is not just through physical things like drink or drugs, but is through propaganda and cultural things and everything that we learn, has, you know, made it so that we can be a zombie who is a slave to work, which is what a zombie is. It's not a dead person brought to life. It's a person who, via the use of certain drugs, can then be under the control of the person who gave him or her those drugs, so that they will perform the tasks that are decided need to be done. So we have to struggle not only within ourselves, but together to get out of that zombification that seems to characterize so much of our public lives as well as our personal lives.
Well, I think on that note, maybe we'll stop. And there's you can always come back here on Mondays at 1 o'clock and join in the discussion. And keeping in mind that we're all struggling against the zombification that our culture is imposing on us, as and that we self-impose too. Of course, we have to, Gregory adds, we have to admit that. So as we all struggle, la lucha continua, la lucha sigue, as we say in Mexico and around the Spanish-speaking world. So please come back next Monday and learn about regenerative agriculture. And whenever you're feeling alienated and zombified on Monday at 1 o'clock, please come join us. Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for participating today.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Tom.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.